All right. Hello, everyone. This is going to be my speech that I just gave at the American Atheists 2024 conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I wanted to share it online for anyone who didn't get a chance to see it, as well as for record keeping, so it's archived and I can look back at it. This is creating change in America's military. Thank you all for being here and taking the time to watch it. It genuinely means a lot. So before I went up on stage, I was introduced and I wanted to talk about some of the conditions that atheists in the military are going through. First, as a disclaimer, for those of you who obviously know, I am active duty military. I'm speaking about my feelings, my personal experiences. A lot of what I have to say does not correlate with military regulation or government policy, unless explicitly stated. This will be largely based on my own experiences, so disclaimer out of the way. That being said, hello there. My name is Will. I'm an active duty nurse and sergeant in the U.S. Army, a happy and outspoken atheist in a foxhole. And the reason I was speaking at the conference is while I was overseas on a deployment with the help of other military atheists, I founded one of the first and few atheist and secular humanist support groups in the Middle East. I think that was a good enough hook. Everything that I just said took years of transformation, deconstruction, reflection, and a lot of help from friends, peers, leaders, and a very influential organization. All weekend, I was sitting at a table representing that organization. That is the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers. They've been around for over 20 years, and they've made a lot of strides for the secular community, for non-theistic service members, atheists, and foxholes, to get the recognition that we deserve. While I was making the group, I worked very closely with their president, Jason Torpy, and it wouldn't have at all been possible without him and the support of so many other people, many of whom joined me at the conference. So I wanted to talk today again about a few challenges that I've found since forming the group, as well as just being a more vocal atheist in general, as well as how to move forward from those challenges and how even the public, the civilian population, can potentially help those atheists who are still in their foxhole. It all boils down to a question. The most common one that I got asked while I was deployed was why? Why essentially create an entire religious service if I'll be leaving it in a few months? Why do it at all? It's not like atheists are asking for a church group anyway. These were some actual questions and statements I got, which one, show that people saying said statements and asking the questions don't really understand what an atheist is. And two, they seem to forget that just like anywhere else in the world, secularists, humanists, free thinkers, and atheists all have the same right to be heard as anyone else. But to answer their question a little more directly, it has a lot to do with the way I was brought up to see the military and how that's changed me today. I was born and raised in an evangelical Christian household in Central Florida. Gross. That should have been the first big red flag. I obviously wouldn't know it at the time, but a lot of how I'd come to view life growing up would be changed by a major disaster that happened not long after I was born. New York City, September 11th, 2001. Obviously, American Christians have always been American Christians, but nationwide, we started to see changes happen after 9/11 that mirrored some of the satanic panic. There were plenty of slogans going around, many of them creating an us versus them mantra, but a lot of critical misinformation that spread came from evangelicals. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were convinced that the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were explicitly religious in nature, and thus began a fighting match of sorts between Islamic countries and a Christian nation. A lot of people have talked about the rising Christian nationalism over the last few years. The president of American Atheists actually gave a pretty good history lesson going all the way back to the Civil War. But I'm confident in saying that one of the seeds of modern Christian nationalism began with the global war on terror. And this would only be the conduit that would ripple policy changes into the U.S. armed forces. Growing up, I'd ask questions about different religions, whether it be Judaism or Buddhism or whatever else. And all too often, I'd be met with responses glorifying the American evangelicals while vilifying everyone else, especially Muslims. This would come from pretty much anyone who I interacted with, but predominantly I noticed it from military veterans. My father just so happens to be one of those veterans. I didn't know it at the time, of course, but 9/11 really impacted those who had previously served. Thousands of veterans were suddenly wanting to re-enlist to defend our country from further attacks. Some of them were truly motivated out of selfless service that had been instilled to them while they were in the military. But others, it was more out of evangelical hostility. I'd hear countless conversations about how the United States needs to bring Christ to the Middle East, which is an ironic statement of that, usually followed by how Muslims don't deserve a place on the earth, how Christianity is the one true way and Muslims are just jealous and that's why they attacked us. Growing up in school, I had it even further ingrained in me that Christianity was the truth and the way and yada yada bullshit. We'd say the Pledge of Allegiance with one nation under God proudly emphasized every morning, which seemed to surprise my parents because they thought we were moving away from God as a nation. In God We Trust was printed on our money and our license plates. I'd see shirts and banners saying, "Stand for the flag, kneel for the cross," which really created the mindset of I'm right, you're wrong, if someone didn't do both of these things. With the conflicts that were going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, this alienated entire civilizations and groups of people. The idea that we actually were a Christian nation just seemed to make sense to little Christian me. I noticed it in the subtler things too, like in 2012's The Avengers movie, where Captain America calls Thor a false god by saying there's only one god and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. I noticed it when I would watch Jeopardy with my dad, and seemingly every other episode had Bible-based questions. By the way, remember the uproar last year about how none of the contestants got the Lord's Prayer answer right? Classic. Anyway, I noticed it in my history classes when Abraham Lincoln mentioned this nation under God at his Gettysburg Address, or when Washington kneeled in prayer at Valley Forge, which, by the way, didn't happen. As I became more interested in the military, I saw historic figures giving credit to the Christian God for their achievements. Medal of Honor recipient Sergeant Alvin York said in his Tennessee Day speech that it's God who holds up the American flag by strengthening all Americans. PFC Desmond Doss gave credit to God for being able to save so many people as a combat medic in Okinawa. And everyone's favorite Navy SEAL and sniper, Chris Kyle, wrote in his autobiography that his personal order of precedence during his military service was God, country, family. The latter two were made even more popular by their respective movies. And fun fact, we actually watched Hacksaw Ridge at my church's youth group. Because how else are you supposed to keep a teenager's attention other than a war movie with your particular flavor of fairy tale? When I got into high school, my junior ROTC instructors both would share their testimonies about how faith got them through their 20 plus years of service to kids at a public school program for government service. When I finally decided to enlist in 2017, all this reinforcement seemed to compound when I took my oath of enlistment. And the final words I got to say before selling soul to Uncle Sam were, "So help me God." I was not instructed that this religious oath was optional. But wait, there's more. If you think the Gideons are bad about having Bibles everywhere, just wait until you see the military. After arriving at my basic training company, one of the first things that they offer to trainees is a basic training Bible. It had a whole reading challenge, a verse for every day, and even a challenge coin that you would get after you completed it. Chaplains who came to talk to the companies were all Christian. There were more Christian services available than every other religion combined. It truly felt in every possible way that I was in the Lord's army. The song stuck in your head now? Good. The thing was, throughout my childhood, I actually did question Christianity. I questioned why an all-loving God could allow such evil in the world, why I saw friends get seriously injured or even die, but read stories about God raising people from the dead, and why a God who always provides would let my family have to literally dig through trash to get by throughout just about the entirety of my adolescence. Of course, when my parents found out about these questions, I was sent to a pastor who would ultimately answer with the mysterious ways crap. Not so surprisingly, the mysterious ways argument was received differently by church leadership. It was God's mysterious ways that my family would have to struggle and suffer through poverty, live in houses that were just a block away from a meth lab. But it was also God's mysterious ways that everyone in church leadership got a 4 to 6 bedroom house, plenty of land to live on. They never had to worry about when their next meal was going to be. Funny how that works. But now that I had enlisted and was finally away from my upbringing, I was free to question everything and find better answers than what pastors had given me. Despite the immense confusion that I felt even asking some of those questions, my deconstruction had started. I had started to see how the sausage was made, and I wasn't going back. So here I was, away from home, with my first real freedom. Questions about my beliefs and my eagerness to look into something new, because clearly the old thing wasn't working. The Christian nationalists and exploitive evangelicals know that my situation is very common. They know that newly enlisted service members are young, impressionable, and open-minded, and they exploit that opportunity to target youth for recruitment and indoctrination, or to keep them in the fold if they were already there. And they're successful. They are successful because our government, our military, our chaplains are doing everything they can to point service members to Christianity with Bibles, Christian services, and high-ranking, well-paid officers with crosses on their collar. Remember, not official military policy, just what I've experienced, but it's one that any veteran who's listening to this can probably agree on. And the larger point of this talk is what I needed after my deconstruction was a supportive community of atheists and foxholes to help me grow into my new beliefs, or lack thereof. What I got was pressure from all sides, including within my own chain of command, to keep swallowing a Christian cross, and it wasn't going down very easy. The slow burn of walking away from the religion that I was raised in really opened my eyes to a lot of things going on in the military. And I saw how many members were using religion as a tool to help themselves get what they want, not what they need. There have been examples, obvious ones that have been around for decades, like requesting religious exemptions to get time off to go to church or to grow a beard. But we've seen a gross misuse of those exemptions recently. In 2021, when the COVID-19 vaccine was rolling out, Christians across all denominations and branches of service were fighting to not receive the shot, claiming it was the mark of the beast, or quoting Isaiah 53:5 or Job 5:18, that they are healed only through Christ. Thousands of service members were flagged, discharged, barred from reenlistment, and most importantly, created a health risk to those around them because of what their silly little book said. The really crazy thing is how many medical personnel were advocating for this. I enlisted as a 68 Charlie licensed practical nurse, where I went through a year of accelerated nursing school to receive my LPN license through the Texas Board of Nursing. Throughout all that time, both in school and working as a nurse, evidence-based practice is constantly talked about. We give certain medications or do certain surgeries because evidence shows that they work. We get vaccines every year around flu season because the evidence shows they help protect you against influenza. And even if you do contract it, it isn't as bad as it would be if you didn't have the vaccine. Suddenly, CNAs, medics, nurses, doctors of all different ranks, backgrounds, civilian and military, were refusing a life-saving vaccine because of their shared religion. I mean to emphasize life-saving because of how many patients who I personally treated that didn't believe in the vaccine and subsequently lost their lives to COVID. I honestly wonder what the outcome would have been if they had listened to reason instead of religion. Another issue the military is constantly battling is the toll it takes on a service member's mental health. Turns out that moving someone away from everything they've ever known, not offering much stability for a personal life, and telling them that they very well can die in their line of work can kind of weigh someone down. Many times to the point service members take their own life, which the Army saw its highest uptick in last year. The Army's response is implement various systems and services to try and prevent these things from happening. Thankfully, there have been some secular strides. The Defense Health Agency has partnered with and created a number of applications to get service members in touch with trained counselors and even help them with conditions like clinical anxiety and depression through breathing exercises, journaling, physical health and fitness, and a therapy called pleasant event scheduling. These are all effective secular treatments that are backed by clinical trials and research. Unfortunately, not enough service members know about these because guess what's encouraged, suggested, promoted, advertised even more than clinical behavioral health? Chaplain support. It's enticing, especially to a brand new private who's afraid to put anything on their record that might affect their career, because military chaplains are advertised as a listening ear without the paperwork. For those who aren't familiar with the military, understand that junior enlisted service members are young, have a full career ahead of them, and are trained very thoroughly to follow orders and be team players, to be like everyone else. There's a lot of pressure to avoid sticking out and being seen as weird or different, and that can be a real threat to a new career. Also, understand that chaplains have rank attached to them, usually pretty senior ranks. They are officers, so they outrank every private and every sergeant and even every junior officer, So the pressure to conform and follow orders from a cross-bearing senior officer is massive. Add to that confidentiality. Service members are told that they can tell anything to a chaplain without the risk of being reported for whatever they say. Simultaneously, this creates a stigma against actual medical therapy. As of November 2023, there are around 5,000 chaplains between both active duty and reserve components in the U.S. military, representing Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Guess which one is the majority? Actually, how about this? How many of those 5,000 chaplains do you think aren't Christian? Is it less than 1,000? Less than 500? I'll give you a hint. It's less than 50. Less than 50% of all chaplains in the military are not Christian. They are something else. That's around 98.7% of all chaplain representation being some denomination of Christian, which, by the way, Christianity only makes up about 66% of the military. How many vulnerable service members received care or anything else from a Christian chaplain that ultimately caused themselves more harm or even worse? I bet that's a statistic you won't be able to find. These are some serious issues that the military is facing today. And while progress is being made, there is still a lot to be done, especially for atheists and foxholes. In 2017, the Department of Defense officially recognized humanism and atheism as a religious preference, giving some recognition to anywhere between 3 and 30% of the U.S. armed forces. This came 3 years after the Army had already started recognizing it. Despite this, there's still little help or acknowledgement given to those atheists in foxholes. Other countries' militaries are doing great. The Dutch military is a shining example of this, with this year celebrating its 60th anniversary of having humanist chaplains. Meanwhile, the U.S. is still lagging behind. There have been multiple attempts to get a humanist chaplain commissioned in the U.S. military for over a decade now, but those attempts have been continuously shot down by other military chaplains and even Republican lawmakers. There was one man in particular who, out of respect, I won't name or show here, has tried since 2013, but has repeatedly been denied his commission despite meeting the prerequisites to be an active duty military chaplain. Why? Because, well, atheist chaplains just don't make sense, apparently. Ron Cruz, the executive director for the Chaplains Alliance for Religious Liberty, said that the humanist rejection after chaplaincy is supposed to, or after the humanist rejection, is that chaplaincy is supposed to assist service members wanting to practice their religious beliefs. The key word there being belief, and the military is affirming that chaplains must be persons of faith. Sure, atheist service members can still go to a chaplain or congregate together with chaplain support, as long as a humanist chaplain doesn't exist. And spoiler alert, getting atheists to congregate together and get a group started is a pain in the ass. But this particular applicant didn't give up so easy, and he applied again in 2018 and actually made some headway. Yeah, he was recommended for chaplaincy by the Navy's Chaplain Appointment and Retention Eligibility Group, or CARE Group, but was shot down again because of Republican lawmakers. 22 senators and 45 congressmen signed letters sent to the Navy's Chief of Chaplains and the Secretary of the Navy, saying, "We are concerned that the Navy is taking steps to expand the chaplain corps beyond its focused purpose. The chaplaincy is designed to facilitate the exercise of religious belief, not philosophical belief." This, of course, came a year after the DoD had formally recognized humanism. Interestingly enough, while the U.S. continues to deny our own military humanist chaplains, they don't have an issue working with others. Just last summer, the Belgian Navy had one of their humanist chaplains address our service members during a training exercise in the Baltics. In my opinion, it seems more and more as this dispute goes on that the U.S. military is only interested in helping and offering equal representation for some instead of all. Oops, did I say the quiet part out loud? These are some issues that atheists and foxholes are facing today. But again, progress is being made. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and listen as I tell you a story about some positive change that was just made last year in the Middle East. In the merry month of May, I joined MAAF in 2023 after learning about them from last year's American Atheists Convention. That same month, I deployed to the Middle East with my previous unit, a combat support hospital. Some of y'all might have known it as a MASH. While I was there, I came to the realization that despite various activities available to service members through the MWR or USO, there was one community that was missing: the atheists. Some people join the military for a number of different reasons, whether it be for college benefits, or their family was military, or maybe they just played way too much Call of Duty. Everyone has a reason. One of the more common ones is to escape wherever they were before they joined. Escape an abusive partner or family member, a bad situation, or just seek to better themselves. When someone is attached to a religion, they have one extra source of community that they can share and bond over. That person can walk into a chapel, a church, a mosque, or a temple and feel some sense of belonging or comfort. And this is good. It's objectively good for Christians to have Christian community, Muslims to have the Muslim community, and so on. I'm happy for them. This But for those who don't ascribe to a religious belief, we're left hanging in the wind. Many of us know what it's like to be outcast from our families, our towns, our friends, just because we don't believe in what they do. So while I was at Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, thousands of miles away from home, away from friends and family, I sought to fix that, to make a group or service that atheists and foxholes could find community in. I reached out to Jason from MAAF, explaining what it is that I intended to accomplish, and he was immediately on board. A couple weeks after we talked, I got a care package with flyers and pamphlets, pens, buttons, and more to help promote the group. I reached out to friends and fellow content creators on TikTok or other media for ideas on how to structure this little group that I wanted to start and what exactly we would do. Together, we built a comprehensive lesson plan that filled about 14 weeks worth of discussion. With the help of over a dozen people, half a dozen time zones away, the plan was finalized. Now, how would I put it into action? As I mentioned, there were various organizations out on Camp Arifjan. There was the American Red Cross, the United Service Organizations, or the Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Department. But which one of them would be willing to host a gathering of humanists? Would they try to make it something else instead? I asked around to some veteran friends of mine and even some leadership who I trusted, and ironically, I found my answer in the Religious Support Office. Makes sense, right? Like I said, the DoD recognized humanism as a belief among service members, so they should be able to help. I printed out some flyers, I brought in some buttons that Jason had sent me, and pitched my idea to the chaplains. How well do you think that initially went? Why do you want to start an atheist club? How about you check out this philosophy class we have instead? That was the initial response I got from the ASG command chaplain, simply brushing it off. What this chaplain was peddling seemed to be official policy, and the theme stuck that atheists are second-class citizens because beliefs about not God are less credible or not as important or valid or respected as beliefs about God. Maybe it was ignorance on his part. Maybe it was Maybelline. Who knows? But it seemed, again, based on my experience, to be unwritten but ubiquitous, encouraged, and enforced policy. I kept insisting on the idea that I had a place for non-theists where they could find refuge in while deployed. And after showing them some of the work that MAAF has done, they ultimately agreed to help. They sent it up the chain of command, and I waited. Usually, services would get approved on the immediate level, but because this was a brand new thing, it had to go up and up and up. And so I waited for about 2 weeks until I heard back from the CENTCOM chaplain. In other words, the boss of all chaplains in the Middle East. And then it finally got approved. Now was the time to start advertising it. Before continuing, though, I want to highlight the situation that I was in so far. If I were a Christian or any other religion, I could have walked into several services with senior officers and chaplains just showering me with support. But since I'm an atheist, I had to reach out to a non-military organization, push through deflection and opposition, and escalate several levels in the chain of command just to meet with other people who believe like I do. That struggle is something every atheist in a foxhole faces. And the vast majority have too much work or stress and concern about their jobs to push through that barrier. So I hung up flyers all over the camp, even having it broadcast on the Armed Forces Network, announcing what the group was and who it was for. And I got responses from a lot of different ranked personnel, even a lieutenant colonel. I got permission to announce it to my unit's group chat and was surprised by the amount of feedback that I got. I learned just how many humanists, atheists, Satanists, and deconverted Christians or Catholics or Mormons, which let's be honest, are all really the same thing, were in my unit. There were some less than enthusiastic responses, though. Of all people, my first sergeant, who is the senior enlisted leader in my unit, pulled me aside one day asking about the group. What's humanism? Well, I offered my response that humanism is a progressive philosophy or belief that affirms that we can live morally and ethically responsible lives without the need of a God belief or anything else supernatural. That we can be good without God. He responded with the less than professional rhetoric that Christianity is the only religious belief that makes sense, how atheism is irrational, and the likes of Dawkins and Hitchens were out of their mind. Don't worry, the Army's Equal Opportunity Program stepped in and handled things afterward. To clarify, I had to file a formal complaint against my boss to be part of this program, to make this program and have it survive. It's good that the system actually worked, but the fact that it had to come to that was ridiculous. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if other atheists in foxholes would have stopped after a similar instance happening. So I know I've been teasing it for the last 20-ish minutes, but what exactly did we do to make the group stand out? It's a personal belief of mine that knowledge inspires rational decisions. And for people who deconstruct it from a high control religion, it offers a sense of healing as well. Every week when the group would meet, we'd have a 30 to 45-minute class, and the rest of the time would be a discussion, sharing stories, experiences, and more. We went over humanism as a positive philosophy, the 10 Commitments from the American Humanist Association. We picked apart various holy books, including the Bible, the Quran, the Havmal, and the Satanic Bible, comparing those various writings to a modern humanist morals and mindset. We dove into hell doctrine, explaining how raising someone from a young age to believe that they'll burn forever if they don't worship a god is a lot more like child abuse. I even had a psych nurse and a psychologist from my unit attend that class and offer some experience that they've had both personally and clinically. We did book reviews and summaries on the God delusion and why there is no God. We discussed Christian nationalism with active theocracies in the world, analyzing the harm that's caused on a systemic level, especially to minorities or really anyone who isn't straight and male. In the US, you can tack white onto that list too. This might sound solely like religious criticism, but in the situation where we felt assaulted from all sides by evangelism, it was necessary to have at least some discussions about Christianity and other religions to understand our situation. We watched documentaries like Hail Satan and Shiny Happy People, which, if you haven't watched it, is a doozy in itself. The coolest moment was when one of the group members asked to share her story and experience with purity culture. She talked about the cult that she was raised in, how she deconstructed, and what she learned since then. She was actually one of the first people to express interest in the group. That night alone is exactly what the group was started for. So fellow military atheists could find a safe space to speak their mind without repercussions, judgmental audience, or being told the same mysterious ways bullshit that we have all heard before. So there's some good and sad news to take away from this story. The sad news is that, unfortunately, mainly due to recent events in the Middle East, the group wasn't sustainable. I passed it off to another NCO who was interested in maintaining it, but unfortunately, Army missions in the region take priority, and the group has fallen apart and faded away. The good news is now we know this can be done. Positive secular change that combats the norm of religious domination can be achieved. All we have to do is raise enough hell about it. That small victory gives me hope that issues I mentioned earlier will be resolved in the near future without the need of some crazy religious belief. American Atheists, the Military Association of Atheists and Free Thinkers, and other groups, and even civilian support is absolutely instrumental to help those atheists who are still in their foxholes. the ones who have to fight so hard for even the tiniest of communities. We've seen the public do pretty amazing things when our voices are heard together, both inside and outside the military. One of the most prominent examples was recently the uproar after Specialist Vanessa Guillen was sexually harassed, assaulted, and murdered. The absolute hell that was raised caused immense reformation within the military and how they respond to sexual assault cases through the SHARP program, at least on the Army side of things. Our voices cried out for justice and change, and it was delivered. While the line "we the people" has kind of been distorted by the far right, it remains a fact that we, the atheist, the secularist, the humanist, all have a voice, and even the highest levels of government can't deny that. I hope hearing about starting this kind of refuge for atheists speaks to some of y'all. I would love to see more groups and gatherings outside of just annual conventions and get to the point where we don't have to defend our lack of belief from the obnoxiously religious as we move toward a more secular society. I hope some of y'all who listen to this are inspired to create those groups yourself. And even though I had the support of MAAF with this achievement, I was far from alone in it. Recognize that you have a community all around you of secular minds who contribute beautifully to the world through their works. Whether it be scholars like Dr. Bart Ehrman or Alexandria Fry, the organizations like American Atheists, MAAF, Recovering from Religion, Secular Student Alliance, podcasters like Captain Dadpool, Baff and Mel, Sunny Secular, Dr. Ben, Seth Andrews, or activists on any level from TikTok to the courtrooms. We have community, and we have the power to create positive change in the world. And even if, after all that, it still feels hopeless, I trust that the next generation will handle things just fine. About a month ago, I was talking to my teenage daughter, an honorary Gen Alpha, answering questions that she had related to religion because we hadn't really had the discussion about beliefs in the house before. Before we got too far into it, she proudly said that she didn't believe in a God because it just seems stupid. The future is secular, my friends. Thank you so much. So, with that was my speech. Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Have a good one.